On a bustling morning at Kingston International Airport, the noise of announcements and the sound of suitcase wheels rolling on the tile floor created a lively atmosphere. Thomas walked through the boarding area in his neat uniform. His dark blue blazer was crisply pressed, and the golden insignia on his lapel gleamed in the light. He gently assisted passengers, answering pre-flight inquiries. Thomas had been with the airline for over a decade, starting as a flight attendant and gradually advancing to become the leader of the company. Even though he held the position of CEO where he often worked behind the scenes, every time he wore his old uniform to reconnect with the team and passengers, he felt a special joy. Today he walked to the boarding area, greeting each passenger with a warm smile, his politeness a breath of fresh air amidst the hustle of the airport. However, as he passed a group of wealthy passengers standing near the VIP lounge, the murmurs began. "Look at him, that flight attendant, always trying so hard. He must really need tips," one of them sneered, pointing at Thomas as he walked by. The next remark echoed, "Maybe he's hoping to get a tip from us?" Thomas paid no attention to the comments. His years in the industry had trained him to handle rude remarks with grace and calm. For him, the most important thing was still to ensure that passengers had a safe and comfortable journey. After this group of passengers boarded the plane, their attitude remained unchanged, dismissing the cabin crew's instructions and demanding immediate service. As the head flight attendant for the flight that day, Thomas maintained his focus on them, ensuring that their behavior did not disrupt the harmony of the entire flight. As the flight began and the noise inside the plane gradually subsided, this group of passengers continued to disturb the atmosphere in the cabin. Their behavior grew increasingly excessive, with one of them even rudely signaling to a young crew member serving drinks. "Hey, tell your supervisor to bring more ice for my champagne," he ordered arrogantly. Thomas, maintaining his calm demeanor, approached. "Sir, how may I assist you?" The man looked at him with disdain, his lips curling in contempt. "Yes, get me someone who actually speaks proper English," he mocked, laughing with his friends around him. The young crew member behind Thomas seemed flustered, but Thomas gently placed a hand on her arm to reassure her before turning back to the man. "Of course, sir," he said in a calm, unwavering tone. "Let me take care of that for you." As he walked away to get the ice, he overheard one of the passengers from the group mutter, "Just a Filipino flight attendant, they only know how to serve." Thomas kept his composure, his jaw clenched but his demeanor unfazed. He knew better than to engage with their mockery. He had seen enough to understand that this flight was no ordinary one and that these passengers would soon learn a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. The plane soared into the sky, gliding through the clouds as most passengers settled comfortably in their seats, enjoying snacks or scrolling through their electronic devices. However, the wealthy group in business class continued to attract attention. One man, his expensive watch gleaming under the cabin lights, reclined in his seat, smirking and calling out loudly, "Hey, flight attendant." His voice pierced through the otherwise tranquil atmosphere, drawing uneasy glances from nearby passengers. Thomas approached with a calm demeanor, unfazed by the outburst. "Yes, sir, how can I assist you?" he asked calmly. The man pointed dismissively at his meal, his tone dripping with disdain. "This chicken is too dry. Do you have anything better, or is this the best you people can do?" His words hung in the air, laced with condescension, the phrase "you people" striking like a slap to the face. Thomas kept his expression neutral, though another nearby passenger couldn't hide their discomfort. "I'm sorry to hear that, sir," Thomas said, his voice unwavering. "Let me see what I can do to improve your meal experience." Another member of the group, a woman in designer attire, seized the opportunity. "Can you tell whoever designed this plane to fix the seats? They're not as luxurious as I expected, or wait, do you even understand what I'm saying?" Her friends erupted in laughter as if they had told the funniest joke. Thomas remained steadfast, his hands neatly clasped in front of him. "Ma'am, we take all passenger feedback seriously," he replied politely but firmly. "Is there anything else I can assist you with?" The woman rolled her eyes, muttering, "Just don't mess up my order like last time." As Thomas turned to fulfill their requests, the mocking whispers continued behind him. "Why do they hire people like this?" one of them sneered. "Probably just cheap labor." Little did they know, other passengers had begun to take notice of the group's behavior. A middle-aged couple sitting behind them exchanged uncomfortable glances, while a young man across the aisle discreetly recorded the scene on his phone. In the galley, Thomas paused for a moment to regain his composure. He had dealt with rude passengers before, but there was something about the disdain from this group that made it particularly hard to bear. Still, he reminded himself of the lesson he learned in the early days of his career. Composure is power. "Are you okay, ma'am?" A young attendant asked when she saw Thomas standing silently. Thomas smiled reassuringly. I'm fine, just make sure we continue to take care of every passenger as usual. His calm demeanor remained unchanged, but deep down he knew that this group of passengers would soon learn a valuable lesson, and fate seemed to have orchestrated it perfectly. The plane had reached cruising altitude, and most passengers were settled comfortably in their seats, either enjoying their meals or scrolling through their devices. However, the wealthy group of passengers remained determined to make their presence known. One of them, wearing an expensive watch that gleamed under the cabin lights, leaned back in his seat, smirking as he called out loudly, "Hey, steward!" His voice broke the tranquil atmosphere, drawing concerned glances from passengers around him. Thomas calmly approached, his demeanor unwavering despite the challenge in the man's tone. As the majority of passengers continued quietly with their activities, the cabin lights dimmed slightly as the crew prepared for a smooth stretch of the flight. Thomas was doing his rounds, ensuring that all passengers were taken care of when suddenly, a loud thud echoed from the business class cabin. The man with the luxury watch had collapsed in the aisle. His friends immediately jumped from their seats in a panic. "Someone help," one of them screamed, "he's not breathing." The cabin erupted into chaos as passengers turned their heads to see what had happened. The crew immediately sprang into action, but Thomas was the quickest. He dropped to his knees beside the man, his voice calm yet commanding. "Sir, can you hear me?" he asked gently, tapping the man's shoulder. The man's face was pale, beads of sweat dotting his forehead. One of his companions, in a panic, shouted, "Do something, don't just sit there." But Thomas ignored their outburst, quickly assessing the situation. He checked the man's pulse and noticed his breathing was shallow. Years of training had prepared him for this moment. "We need to call for medical assistance on board and bring the first aid kit immediately," Thomas instructed a junior attendant. He then turned to the group. "Is he on any medication? Are there any health issues we should know about?" The group exchanged frantic looks, their earlier arrogance now replaced by fear. I don't know," one of them stammered. "He's never mentioned anything like this." The tension in the cabin thickened as Thomas worked swiftly. Passengers whispered among themselves, some astonished by his calm demeanor amidst the chaos. Moments later, an oxygen mask was secured over the man's face. The doctor quickly placed the oxygen mask over the man's face, and Thomas adjusted the oxygen flow carefully. Another crew member brought the first aid kit, but Thomas seemed to have already gained control of the situation. "We need to keep him stable until we can assess his condition," Thomas said. Unexpectedly, a passenger from economy class stepped forward. "I'm a doctor, can I assist?" Thomas looked up and nodded in thanks. "Thank you, please help us." The doctor knelt beside the man and examined him. After a moment, the doctor looked at Thomas, his face filled with admiration. "You've done everything correctly. It's a relief to have someone so well trained on board." These words carried a weight that no one could ignore. The group of wealthy passengers looked back and forth between Thomas and their unconscious friend, realizing that the flight attendant they had mocked might just be the one who saved their friend's life. As the doctor and Thomas continued to work together to stabilize the passenger, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. The earlier tension was gone, replaced by respect and admiration for Thomas's composure and professionalism. Eventually, the man's condition stabilized. Although still pale, he was now breathing steadily. His head was supported by pillows Thomas had carefully arranged. "Thank you so much," one of his friends said, his voice trembling. The arrogance they had shown earlier was gone, replaced with humility. "We don't know what we would have done without you." Thomas nodded gently, his face softening while still maintaining his calm composure. "It's my responsibility to ensure the safety of all passengers," he replied, his voice steady. As Thomas stood up and adjusted his uniform, he caught the eye of another passenger who had witnessed the entire situation. The passenger gave him a subtle nod and raised a hand in a thumbs-up gesture. Thomas smiled softly in response, acknowledging the silent appreciation. The passengers aboard the flight had no idea that the surprises for the day were far from over. As the flight continued, the tension from the earlier incident slowly dissipated. The once arrogant group of passengers now sat quietly, their earlier confidence replaced by gratitude and perhaps a touch of embarrassment. The man who had collapsed was now stable, thanks to the help of Thomas, the doctor, and the rest of the crew. Together, they had worked diligently to maintain calm throughout the ordeal, ensuring the atmosphere remained as serene as possible. Marie returned to the galley to check on her team's work and gather her thoughts. She straightened her blazer and took a deep breath, understanding that moments like this were what defined her career. However, as she was about to continue her rounds through the cabin, a young flight attendant approached her, looking a little hesitant. "Excuse me, Marie," she whispered, "one of the passengers requested to meet you. They want to ask about your position." Marie raised an eyebrow but nodded in agreement. "Let me handle it," she said, stepping out of the galley. When she reached business class, the group of wealthy passengers had gathered around the seat of their friend. They were visibly still anxious. One of them, the woman dressed in designer clothing who had previously mocked Marie, waved her over. "Sorry, miss," the woman said, her voice much softer now. "We wanted to thank you for what you did. I don't know how you managed to stay so calm. Is that how you always are?" Marie smiled politely. "It's part of our training. We prepare for every situation to ensure the safety of our passengers." One of the men in the group, who had been the most critical earlier, spoke up next. "But why are you so different? You seem like you're not just following training, you really have something special. What do you do for this airline?" Marie paused for a moment, a brief hesitation crossing her mind. She had never faced this question from passengers before. Marie wasn't one to seek attention, but there was something in their sincere tone that made her reconsider. "Let's just say I've been with this airline for a long time," she said, carefully choosing her words. The doctor sitting nearby overheard the conversation and chuckled. "You can be as modest as you want, Ms. Williams, but we've seen it. That kind of composure and leadership isn't just about being a flight attendant." The group of passengers looked at each other, clearly confused. "Wait," the woman said slowly. "You're not just a flight attendant?" Marie sighed softly and gave a small nod. "No, I'm not. I'm the CEO of this airline." The cabin suddenly went silent. The group of passengers stared at her, their mouths agape as if they couldn't believe what they had just heard. Even passengers from other rows, who had overheard the revelation, turned to look at her with astonishment. "Really?" the woman stammered, her face paling. Marie placed her hands together, her voice calm and steady. "I started as a flight attendant many years ago. I worked through various roles until I became the CEO. I step into this role from time to time to connect with the team and get a true sense of what's happening on the front lines." Her words weighed heavily on the group. The person they had mocked for her accent and demeanor was not just part of the team, but the leader of the entire airline. One of the men in the group broke the silence. "We had no idea. I mean, you're so humble, we never could have guessed." Marie smiled gently. "There's no room for arrogance when serving others," she said. The group fell silent, their earlier arrogance completely replaced by shame and a profound awareness of the change in how they perceived Marie. Respect began to spread throughout the cabin. Passengers exchanged words of admiration for Marie's humility and leadership. "You've taught us a lot today," the woman admitted, her voice tinged with remorse. "We misjudged you and are truly sorry." Marie nodded softly, showing appreciation. "I value your apology, but true change happens when we learn from these moments. Respect isn't given because of position or title, but through actions and kindness." As she walked away, Marie couldn't help but notice the ripple effect her revelation had on the cabin. Passengers, once divided by status and misunderstanding, now gathered in quiet reflection. However, the journey wasn't over. There was still one last lesson to be learned. The group of passengers sat in silence, their earlier arrogance completely gone. The man who had collapsed was now stable, leaning back in his seat and quietly thanking Marie for saving his life. The woman in designer clothes, once the loudest critic, now sat restlessly, her gaze fixed on the cabin floor. One of the men finally broke the silence. "I can't believe we treated her like that," he muttered, shaking his head. "She's not just the CEO, she's the reason our friend is still alive." The woman sighed deeply. "We were so blind," she admitted. "All this time we thought status and money were everything, but she showed us what real leadership looks like." Another man spoke up, his voice full of regret. "It's not just about leadership, it's about respect. We didn't even think to treat her as a human being." Their words were heard by nearby passengers, who nodded in agreement. An elderly man seated in the row behind them leaned forward and gently said, "You know, sometimes it's never too late to learn a lesson in humility. She has given you a gift and you shouldn't waste it." The group of passengers exchanged looks, their faces flushed with embarrassment. Finally, the woman in designer clothes stood up and walked toward the beverage service area, where Marie was preparing coffee for the crew. She paused for a moment, gripping her hands tightly, then cleared her throat, trying to regain her composure. "Marie," she began, her voice trembling slightly. Marie turned around, her expression calm but curious. "Yes, ma'am, how can I assist you?" "Well," the woman started, her words spilling out quickly, "I want to apologize. We were rude, dismissive, and treated you poorly, but despite everything, you saved our friend and treated us with kindness. I truly apologize for how we acted." Marie looked at her for a moment and then smiled gently. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "Admitting when we're wrong is not easy, but the most important thing is what we learn from those mistakes." The rest of the group approached, nodding in agreement. Each one expressed regret for how they had treated Marie. Marie listened patiently, maintaining her usual calm demeanor. "I appreciate your words," she said, "but remember that what's important isn't me, but how we treat each other as human beings. Everyone deserves respect, regardless of their role or background." The group nodded seriously, her words clearly touching their hearts. As they returned to their seats, their attitude had noticeably shifted. They thanked the crew members, smiled politely at other passengers, and even struck up friendly conversations with each other. The change in the group did not go unnoticed by the doctor, who had assisted earlier. Other passengers observed the newfound humility in the group with quiet admiration. Meanwhile, Marie continued with her duties, her calm professionalism unchanged, but deep inside she felt a sense of satisfaction. Not because she had revealed her position, but because the lesson she hoped to impart seemed to have truly reached their hearts. As the flight neared its destination, the cabin, once divided, now felt united. The wealthy passengers, after this experience, seemed to have genuinely changed. The plane began its descent, the gentle hum of the engines filling the cabin. Outside, the skyline of their destination city gradually came into view. Passengers began fastening their seat belts and clearing away their meal trays, but the atmosphere in business class was completely different from the beginning of the flight. The wealthy group of passengers, once the source of mockery and tension, now sat quietly, their eyes reflecting humility and contemplation. The woman in designer clothes, who had once harshly criticized Marie, turned to her companions, her voice low but filled with resolve. "I think we owe her more than just an apology," she said, her tone serious. "We need to do something to show that we've truly learned from this experience." One of the men nodded. "I agree. She didn't have to treat us kindly after how we behaved, but she did. That's real grace." The group huddled together, whispering and making plans. Their transformation was no longer just on the surface but had become a genuine change. As the plane gently touched down on the runway, the captain's voice came over the intercom, thanking the passengers for flying with the airline. Applause filled the cabin, a customary tradition to celebrate a successful landing, but in business class, this applause carried a special meaning. These claps seemed to be reserved for one person in particular. Marie, walking through the aisles to check on passengers before disembarking, stopped when she saw the group standing and waiting for her. The woman in designer clothes, who had once criticized her, stepped forward, holding a small card in her hand. Marie took a deep breath as she accepted the card, her hand steady but warm with the sincerity of the moment. She opened it slowly, reading the handwritten message in silence, her eyes softening as she took in the words of gratitude and reflection. The note also included a receipt for a generous donation made to a charity supporting Filipino workers in the aviation industry, an unexpected but deeply touching gesture. A small smile appeared on Marie's face as she closed the card, pausing for a moment to gather her thoughts. Looking up at the group of passengers, her eyes met theirs with warmth and understanding. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice calm but laden with meaning. "Not just for this gesture but for truly accepting the lesson. It means more than you can imagine." The group nodded in unison, their faces showing a blend of relief and gratitude. One man stepped forward, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "You've taught us that leadership isn't about titles or power, it's about how you treat others," he said. "That's a lesson we will carry with us for the rest of our lives." Around them, other passengers observed the exchange with quiet admiration. Some even approached Marie to thank her personally for her service and the calm professionalism she had displayed throughout the flight. The atmosphere in the cabin had completely shifted, leaving behind an indelible impression on everyone present. What had started as a tense and divided space was now a place of unity and understanding, with everyone feeling a little closer, a little more human. As the passengers began to disembark, Marie stood at the door, smiling warmly at each one, knowing that the real impact of her actions wasn't just in the lives she had saved or the thanks she had received, but in the change she had sparked, a change that would ripple far beyond this single flight. As the last passengers began to disembark, the atmosphere on the plane had transformed. The usual rush of parting goodbyes was now replaced with a more thoughtful, genuine exchange. Marie stood at the door, offering her familiar warm smile, bidding each person farewell. But this time the gratitude she received was different, It was sincere, heartfelt, and full of respect. The group of wealthy travelers who had been some of the last to board were among the final ones to leave. They paused at the door, turning to look at Marie one last time. The man who had collapsed earlier reached out his hand, his face sincere. "Thank you again, Marie," he said softly. "You didn't just save my life, you opened our eyes to what really matters." Marie shook his hand warmly. "Take care of yourself," she replied. "And remember, every day is an opportunity to treat others with kindness." The woman in designer clothes hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. "I don't know if you'll remember us," she said, her voice filled with regret, "but we will never forget you. Thank you for your patience and grace. You've inspired us to be better." Marie smiled gently. "It's never too late to start," she said softly. The change in the air was palpable, as the group of passengers who had once been full of arrogance now stood humbled, their hearts and minds opened by the lessons they had learned. The respect they now held for Marie wasn't just about her position as CEO, but for the humanity she had shown in the face of their challenges. As they walked off the plane, it wasn't just a moment of departure. It was the beginning of a new perspective for everyone involved. Marie's quiet strength, compassion, and leadership had left an indelible mark, showing that true change begins not with power or authority, but with how we treat one another, especially in moments of adversity. As the last passengers disembarked, they left behind a cabin filled with a deep sense of the remarkable transformation they had witnessed. A young boy tugged at his mother's hand as they passed by Marie. "Mom, she's like a superhero," he whispered, looking up at her with admiration. Marie smiled softly, her heart warmed by the innocent comment. As the final passenger walked off, Marie paused for a moment, looking out at the airport. The sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm golden glow over the bustling terminal. She felt a quiet peace not because of her title but because of the changes she had helped create, the lessons of kindness and respect that had made their mark. The change she had witnessed in those passengers was deeply fulfilling. Back in her office, her team gathered to thank Marie for her leadership on the flight. One of the young attendants, still in awe, asked, "Ms. Marie, how do you stay so calm and composed even when dealing with such difficult people?" Marie paused for a moment, reflecting before answering. "It's not always easy," she admitted, "but I remind myself that everyone is fighting a battle we can't see. Sometimes what they need is someone who shows patience and understanding. And sometimes," she added with a gentle smile, "a little humility can make a big difference." Her words resonated with the team, leaving them with a renewed sense of purpose. Marie's ability to stay grounded and focused despite the challenges she faced had not only helped her navigate difficult situations, but also inspired her team to lead with compassion, understanding, and respect for everyone they encountered. Her words lingered in the air, leaving an indelible mark on her team as they wrapped up their debriefing. Marie stepped outside, ready for her next journey. She didn't seek recognition or applause. For her, the reward lay in moments like these, the moments when kindness and understanding could create lasting impact. As she walked through the airport, a few passengers from the flight recognized her and waved or nodded in greeting. One passenger even stopped to thank her for reminding them what true leadership really means. Marie smiled and continued on her way, her heart light and content. Marie's story is a powerful reminder that true strength is not something we can measure by titles or power, but by the ability to face adversity with calm and treat others with respect and compassion. In the world we live in, small acts of patience and humility can bring about profound change, not only for ourselves but for those around us. Marie didn't just save a life. She planted the seeds of understanding, humanity, and fairness between people who seemed so different from one another. And perhaps, in those moments when we choose to face the world with kindness, we realize that true power does not come from authority, but from the ability to spread love and empathy throughout our communities. That flight was not just a journey through the skies, it was a lesson about change, about how we can build our world from the small things. Marie wasn't just someone doing her job, she was a small flame that lit up the hearts of those filled with prejudice and arrogance. Her story not only teaches us a lesson in humility but also reminds us that every day is an opportunity to change ourselves, to become better people who treat each other with respect and unconditional love. We don't always see the impact of our actions, but it is those small moments that can change an entire life. And as Marie navigated through these challenges, she didn't just change the perceptions of the passengers. She also made us all realize that sometimes true strength doesn't come from conquering the heights but from humbling ourselves, seeing and understanding what others are going through. That is real strength.